"Will you tell my grandma it's okay to go home?" the little girl asked the hospital's insurance director in the corridor outside the cardiac ward. The display above the nursing station reads 11:47 p.m. The fluorescent lights in the hallway of St. Joseph's Health Center in Toronto have that particular hum that only exists after midnight, the kind that gets under your skin and stays there. Malcolm Shepard steps out of the elevator on the 4th floor. He's 44, wearing a charcoal wool overcoat that still smells faintly of the boardroom he left 3 hours ago. He is the Regional Director of Claims Authorization for Northgate Health Insurance, and he has spent the last 11 hours in a glass-walled conference room on Bay Street, defending a policy decision that denied surgical pre-authorization for over 300 patients in the last quarter alone. The press found out this morning. By afternoon, it was on every channel. He isn't here on business. His own mother had a hip replacement 2 days ago, and he promised he'd check in before the end of the week. He's 4 days late. He walks the length of the corridor with his hands in his pockets, reading room numbers. He passes a supply cart. He passes a nurse pushing a medication trolley. He turns the corner toward the cardiac ward, and then he stops. A little girl is sitting alone on a plastic chair outside a closed room door. She looks about 7 years old. She's wearing rubber boots with frogs printed on them, one boot still half unzipped, and a puffy red coat that's too big across the shoulders. In her lap, she holds a sheet of construction paper covered in green and yellow crayon. She isn't crying. She's just sitting very still, the way children sit still when they've been told to wait, and they're trying very hard to be good at it. She looks up when Malcolm slows. "Will you tell my grandma it's okay to go home?" the girl asks. Malcolm stops completely. The girl looks back down at her construction paper. "She keeps saying she has to stay because of the letter, but I want her to come home. She makes better eggs." Malcolm crouches down slowly until he is level with her. "What letter, sweetheart?" The girl reaches into her coat pocket and pulls out a folded piece of paper. It's a Northgate Health Insurance letterhead. Malcolm recognizes the font before he even opens it. He recognizes the case reference number format. He recognizes the denial code in the upper right corner. He doesn't need to read it to know what it says. But he reads it anyway. The patient's name is Dorothy Leung, 71 years old. Referred for a cardiac catheterization procedure by her attending physician. Denied pre-authorization. Reason: procedure deemed elective based on submitted documentation. The denial is dated 6 weeks ago. There are 2 appeal stamps below it, both marked rejected, the second one 3 days ago. Malcolm folds the letter carefully along its original creases. He looks at the little girl. "What's your name?" he asks. "Lily," she says. "I'm Malcolm. Is your mom or dad here with you, Lily?" "My mom's inside." Lily glances at the closed door. "She's been crying for a while, so I came out here to draw Grandma a card, so she has something to look at." Malcolm straightens up. He looks at the closed door. He looks at the denial letter still in his hand. He reads the physician's name on the referral. Dr. Anita Vasquez. He knows that name. She's one of the most respected cardiologists on staff here. She does not submit unnecessary referrals. He pushes the door open quietly. The room is dim. A woman in her early 40s sits in a chair pulled close to the bed. Her dark hair is loose, still in the pulled-apart shape of a long day. She has one hand wrapped around her mother's hand on the bed, and she's talking low, the way you talk to someone when you're trying to sound calm, but everything about you is not calm. Dorothy Leung lies against the propped pillow. She's small. Her silver hair fans out neatly, as though someone has combed it recently, and she's wearing a pale blue hospital gown with a thin white blanket tucked up to her waist. There is a cardiac monitor beside her, and the readout is doing things that Malcolm is not a doctor, but he knows aren't good. The woman in the chair looks up. "I'm sorry," Malcolm says immediately. I'm not staff. Your daughter let me see this." He holds up the letter. "I work for Northgate." The woman's face shifts. It goes from exhausted grief to something colder in about half a second. "You work for them," she says. Not a question. The same flat, devastated way you'd identify an animal that just walked into the room. "My name is Malcolm Shepard. I'm the Regional Director of Claims Authorization." The woman stands. She isn't tall, but she takes up the full space of the room in a way that has nothing to do with height. "You're the one who signs those letters." Malcolm doesn't move. "I oversee the department that—" "My mother has had 2 TIAs in the past 4 months," the woman says. Her voice is very controlled, the kind of controlled that takes enormous effort. "Her cardiologist referred her for a catheterization in August. Your company denied it. We appealed in September. Denied again. We submitted a second appeal with additional imaging results last week. She pauses. 3 days ago we got another letter. I saw it, Malcolm says. She had another episode this afternoon, the woman continues. A bad one. She's stable now, but Dr. Vasquez says if we'd done the catheterization in August, we would know exactly what we're dealing with, and we would have options. Right now we're... She stops. She sits back down. She picks up her mother's hand again. Right now we're waiting. Dorothy Lung turns her head on the pillow and looks at Malcolm. Her eyes are dark and very clear, the kind of clear that sometimes comes with age and sometimes comes with fear. I don't want Lily to miss more school, Dorothy says. Her voice is thin but steady. She's been here every evening this week. She has a science project. Malcolm looks at the woman in the chair. What's your name? Helen, the woman says. Helen Lung. Malcolm looks back at Dorothy. Then he looks at the letter in his hand. He pulls his phone from his coat pocket. I'm going to make a call, he says. Helen looks at him without expression. It's almost midnight, I know. He steps back into the corridor. Lily is still in her chair. She looks up at him. He gives her a small nod, the kind that means nothing is wrong, even though everything is complicated. She seems to accept this. She goes back to her drawing. Malcolm dials his deputy director of medical review. It rings 4 times. The man answers with his voice full of sleep and something close to alarm, because Malcolm does not call at midnight. I need you to pull a file, Malcolm says. Dorothy Leung. Case number on the denial letter is NHI 7741C. He pauses. Tonight. There is a long silence. Malcolm, the review board doesn't reconvene until... I'm not asking for the review board. I'm asking you to pull the file and tell me why a referral from Anita Vasquez was coded as elective. Another pause. Malcolm can hear the man getting out of bed. Keys clicking. The original submission was flagged because the imaging notes used non-urgent language. The algorithm caught it and... Malcolm says. It's standard intake, if the language doesn't meet the threshold markers for urgent. She's had 2 TIAs, Malcolm says. In 4 months, silence. That's not what the intake flagged, the man says. Quieter now. I know it's not what the intake flagged, Malcolm says. I'm telling you what the patient's chart says. He pauses. How many cases this quarter came through that same algorithm filter? The sound of keys again, a longer silence. 83, the man says finally. Malcolm closes his eyes for 1 second. Pull every one of them, he says. Have the list on my desk by 7. He ends the call. He stands in the corridor for a moment with his phone in his hand. The fluorescent light hums above him. Lily has finished the green crayon section of her drawing and has moved on to yellow. Malcolm goes back inside. Helen doesn't look up when he enters. Dorothy does. My deputy director is reviewing the file tonight, Malcolm says. I can't promise you a reversal before morning, but I am telling you that the denial should not have stood after the first appeal, and I am going to find out why it did. Helen looks at him now. Her expression hasn't softened much. It's the expression of someone who has learned not to let relief in too early because it costs too much when it leaves. Why? She asks. Malcolm looks at the cardiac monitor, at the numbers that require a doctor to interpret, but which feel, even to him, like a conversation happening in a language he should have learned earlier. Because Dr. Vasquez doesn't submit unnecessary referrals, Malcolm says. And because your daughter is sitting in a hallway drawing a card instead of being at home doing her science project. Helen looks at him for a long time. She looks at the letter which he has set on the edge of the bed. She looks at her mother's hand, still held in both of hers. She made me promise I wouldn't let her become a burden, Helen says finally. Her voice quiet enough that it almost disappears. She keeps asking if the hospital bills are going to take the house. Dorothy closes her eyes. Malcolm stands very still in the center of the room. He is a man who has spent 7 years building authorization frameworks and efficiency models and cost containment strategies. He has sat in rooms where the phrase acceptable attrition was used in quarterly reports and no one flinched. He flinches now. I'll be back in the morning, Malcolm says. He picks up his coat from the chair by the door. As he moves to leave, a small voice says his name from the doorway. Lily is standing at the threshold, construction paper in both hands. I made one for you too, she says. She holds out a separate sheet, smaller, torn along one edge. In orange crayon slightly sideways it reads, "Thank you for listening." Malcolm takes the paper. He folds it once and puts it in his coat pocket. He doesn't say anything because there is nothing to say yet. He gives Lily a small, honest nod. Then he walks to the elevator and rides it down to the lobby in silence. The Northgate Health Insurance Regional Office sits on the 22nd floor of a glass tower on University Avenue. At 7:14 in the morning, the boardroom already smells of dark roast coffee and something electric and nervous. Because Malcolm sent a meeting request to his entire senior team at 6 a.m. with no agenda listed. His deputy director, a man named Stuart Park, sets a printed report on the table in front of him without making eye contact. 83 cases, 18 of them cardiac-related, all flagged by the same intake algorithm during the same 4-month window, all denied or delayed at initial submission, 22 successful appeals, 61 still in various stages of the review process or abandoned entirely, because people give up, Malcolm knows, because the process is designed at a pace that exhausts the people who need it most. He reads the report standing up, which he never does. The room is quiet. The algorithm was trained on historical approval language, Stuart says carefully. It weights urgent language markers. Non-urgent syntax gets flagged for manual review, but manual review has a 45-day backlog, so those files sit. Someone appeals, Malcolm says. Until someone appeals. Yes, Malcolm sets the report down. He looks around the table. 6 people. All of them know their jobs well. All of them understand the system they built together, its logic and its architecture. None of them built it to hurt anyone. That is the part that makes it worse. How many of these patients are in active treatment delay? Malcolm asks. Stuart clears his throat. Based on last night's pull, approximately 31. I want those 31 cases manually reviewed and resolved by end of week, Malcolm says. Bypass the standard queue. The head of operations, a woman named Patricia Chen, leans forward. Malcolm, we don't have the reviewer bandwidth to reassign it. Pull people from the quarterly audit if you have to. The audit is for compliance with our own policies. If our policies are causing this, the audit can wait. Patricia looks at him. Then she writes something down. I want to know how the algorithm was approved for cardiac referrals, Malcolm continues. I want to know who signed off on it. And I want to know if the same filter is being applied to oncology, neurology, or any other time-sensitive category. The room is quiet, and I will try to define the appeal pathway, Malcolm says. 2 rounds of denial for a cardiac referral from a staff cardiologist is not a process. It's an obstacle course. The legal counsel at the end of the table, a cautious man named Brian Cho, sets down his pen. Malcolm, if we acknowledge a systemic flaw in the authorization algorithm, we open the company to retroactive liability on every case that ran through it. I know, Malcolm says. The board will want to discuss the exposure before any public acknowledgement or policy change. I know that too, Malcolm says. Get the board chair on the phone. I want to talk to him before noon. Brian stares at him. Also, Malcolm says, call St. Joseph's. I want Dorothy Lung's file reviewed and a pre-authorization decision issued this morning. He picks up the printed report and walks out of the boardroom. The board chair's name is William Forsyth. He's been with Northgate for 26 years. He's the kind of man who communicates primarily in legal frameworks and fiscal quarters, and he meets Malcolm in his corner office at 11 a.m., with the expression of someone who has already consulted his own legal team. You want to publicly acknowledge an algorithm error, William says. He doesn't phrase it as a question. He phrases it the way a person says something back to you when they want you to hear how it sounds. I want to fix the authorization pipeline for time-sensitive cardiac and oncology cases, Malcolm says. The public acknowledgement follows from that, not the other way around. Brian says you want to retroactively review 61 denied cases. 61 cases that were filtered by a system we approved, Malcolm says. Yes. William looks at him across the desk. He's not a cruel man. He's a careful man. The distinction matters less than it should. Malcolm, William says carefully, what happened last night? Malcolm doesn't answer right away. He thinks about Lily in the corridor, with her frog boots, one half unzipped. He thinks about the yellow crayon. A 71-year-old woman asked her daughter if the hospital bills were going to take the house, Malcolm says. She has been asking this for 6 weeks, while a referral her cardiologist submitted in August sat in a backlog queue, because the language didn't trigger the right words in a piece of software we approved without ever asking what it would do to the cases it missed. William is quiet. We are not the villains, Malcolm says. I know how the math works. I built half of it. But the math is supposed to serve the coverage, and the coverage is supposed to serve the patients. Somewhere in between, we built a system that's better at protecting the company than protecting the people who pay us to protect them. William picks up his pen. He sets it back down. If we move on this, William says. I need the legal exposure quantified first. I need a structured review process, not an open-ended audit. And I need to know that you are not going to walk into a press conference and announce corporate negligence without board approval. I'm not going to a press conference, Malcolm says. I'm going back to St. Joseph's. He takes the elevator to the 4th floor just before 2 in the afternoon. The corridor is quieter than it was the night before. A different nurse is at the station. The chair outside Dorothy Lung's room is empty. He knocks. Helen opens the door. She looks different in daylight. She looks like someone who slept a little, or tried to. She looks at him and then past him, as if checking whether he brought lawyers. They called this morning, she says. The catheterization is approved. I know, Malcolm says. I wanted to make sure. Helen looks at him for a long moment. Then she steps back and opens the door wider. Dorothy is sitting up. Not fully upright, but propped up more than last night, and her eyes are brighter. Lily is cross-legged on the end of the bed, and she has apparently convinced her grandmother to draw something with her, because there are crayons spread across the blanket. Dorothy looks at Malcolm. The insurance man, she says. Yes, Malcolm says. My daughter says you called your office at midnight. I did. Dorothy considers this with the particular patience of someone who has been around long enough to reserve judgment. Why? She asks. The same question Helen asked him last night in the dark. Malcolm looks at the crayon drawing taking shape on the construction paper between them. Lily is drawing a house. Beside it, she's drawing a smaller shape that might be a garden, or might be a car, or might be a dog. It's hard to tell, but she's drawing it with absolute conviction. Because a referral from Dr. Vasquez should not have taken 6 weeks and 2 appeals, Malcolm says. I needed to understand how that happened before it happened again. Dorothy nods slowly, the way people nod when they accept an answer even though it doesn't fix the 6 weeks that already passed. Lily says you took her drawing, Dorothy says. I did. Dorothy reaches over and pats Lily's knee. She made 3, Dorothy says. 1 for me, 1 for her mother, and 1 for the man in the corridor who listened. Malcolm pulls the folded piece of construction paper from his inside pocket. He holds it for a moment. Then he sets it gently on the bedside table so Dorothy can see it. Thank you for listening. In orange crayon, slightly sideways, Dorothy reads it. Her mouth does something complicated and very quiet. The procedure is scheduled for Thursday, Helen says from behind him. Her voice has lost the cold edge from last night. It hasn't become warm exactly. It's become something more honest than both. Dr. Vasquez says if everything looks the way she expects, Mom can go home by the weekend. Good, Malcolm says. He turns to leave. Then he stops because Lily has climbed off the bed and is standing at his elbow looking up at him with absolute directness. Do you have a grandma? Lily asks. Malcolm thinks of his own mother 2 floors below, recovering from a hip replacement he visited 4 days late. I do, he says. Lily nods seriously. You should visit her, she says. Grandma's like that. Malcolm looks at her for a moment. Then he says, I will. He goes downstairs. His mother is awake, reading a library paperback with a cracked spine. She looks up when he comes in. She doesn't ask why he's late or what kept him. She just moves her book to the nightstand and holds out her hand, and he pulls a chair close and sits. They don't talk about work. They talk about nothing in particular. Outside the window, the late October light is thin and yellow over the city, the kind that won't last another month. 3 weeks later, Malcolm is not the same person in the boardroom. He is still the regional director of claims authorization. He still sits in the same chair, but he has spent the last 3 weeks taking a very careful look at what that chair is actually for. The algorithm has been suspended for cardiac, oncology, and neurological referrals pending a full independent audit. The 61 flagged cases have been reviewed. 44 of them have been approved or fast-tracked. The remaining 17 involve genuine documentation gaps, and a new patient liaison team has been set up specifically to help those claimants complete their files without abandonment. The appeal pathway for specialist referrals has been cut from 2 rounds to 1. Response timelines have been mandated in writing. It has cost the company money. Not catastrophic money, but real money. William Forsythe has said, twice, in measured tones, that Malcolm needs to ensure the next quarter's numbers reflect the efficiency of the new process and not just the remediation costs. Malcolm has told him both times that the numbers will reflect what they reflect. He has not been suspended. He suspects this is because the board chair, in a moment of unusual honesty, told the board that suspending the person who found the problem before a class action lawsuit did would be an extraordinary act of institutional self-destruction. Malcolm is fine with that reason. He doesn't need the better one. He just needs the outcome. One Monday morning in November, he's in the elevator at St. Joseph's. He has a meeting with the hospital's patient advocacy coordinator about integrating a direct contact line between Northgate's review team and admitting physicians. It's an unsexy, technical, important meeting that will probably take 2 hours and produce nothing more dramatic than a shared email protocol and a pilot program for 3 departments. He doesn't expect anything. The elevator doors open on the 4th floor and he almost walks directly into Helen Leung. She's carrying a small potted plant with one hand and holding a canvas bag with the other. She's dressed for work or dressed to go somewhere purposeful. She looks startled and then she looks at him and then she looks at him the way people look at someone when they have thought about them. She went home Saturday, Helen says. I heard, Malcolm says. Dr. Vasquez had sent a brief case closure note through the administrative system. How is she doing? Better. Helen shifts the plant to her other hand. The catheterization showed a significant blockage. They put in 2 stents. Dr. Vasquez says the TIA risk is substantially reduced. I'm glad, Malcolm says. Helen nods. She looks at the plant. I was just dropping this off for the nursing staff. Dorothy wanted to do something, and she can't bake anymore because of the salt restriction, so... She tilts the plant slightly. It's a small pothos, the kind that lives forever on very little attention. She said the nurses were good to her. They were, Malcolm says. Helen looks at him. There's something she wants to say, he can tell, and she's deciding whether to say it. I looked up the algorithm review, she says finally. The one you ordered. It was in the hospital's patient newsletter. She pauses. 44 cases, 44, Malcolm says. I don't know if that's a small number or a large number, Helen says. It's both, Malcolm says, honestly. Helen is quiet for a moment. Then she says, Lily asks about you sometimes. She calls you the Midnight Man. Because you made a phone call at midnight. Malcolm feels something shift in his chest that he doesn't have a good word for. Tell her I say hello, he says. I will. Helen looks at the elevator doors, which have long since closed and opened again on their own schedule. Thank you, she says. Not warmly, not coldly, just plainly. The kind of thank you that costs something to say. I'm sorry it took a midnight phone call, Malcolm says. Helen looks at him. She doesn't tell him it's fine because it wasn't. She doesn't tell him it doesn't matter because it does. She just gives a small nod, the kind that means, I know, and we are both going to have to live with that, and here we are anyway. She gets in the elevator. He walks down the corridor toward the patient advocacy office. The pothos ends up at the nurse's station. Weeks later, Malcolm notices it there when he comes in for another meeting. Someone has tied a small card to one of the stems with a piece of ribbon. The handwriting on the card is in orange crayon, slightly sideways. Please water me. I am trying. Malcolm stands at the nurse's station for a moment longer than he needs to. Then he continues down the corridor. He doesn't fix everything. No one person in a regional directorship of a private insurance company can fix everything, and he has spent enough time in boardrooms to be suspicious of anyone who claims otherwise. But he has changed the part he could see clearly, and he is learning to see more clearly every month. That is not a happy ending, but it's an honest one. And sometimes, when you're standing in a fluorescent-lit corridor, at midnight, holding a letter that shouldn't have said what it said, honest is the best thing you have to offer.